So welcome to the Node.js Node API, Node add-on API team meeting for March 1st, 2024. We'll follow our standard approach of going through the things that were tagged for milestone 11. Let me pull that up and share them. Issue milestone 11. And share, where's my share button? I don't know. Okay, so let's start. Anything new that we should share with the world? We can add it to this issue. It'll get published out.
Regarding that issue, last week, Cheng Zong closed the 2023 version and then created this one for this year.
That makes sense. I saw some of the other PRs to like update the feeder that will feed it in like the news into the right places. So that sounds good. Okay, so if no new news though, we'll move on to help with Node SQLite. Don't know if there's anything going.
He also mentioned that he didn't have any time to check this recently, but it's still on his radar.
Sounds good. I think then on like the C language bindings, the debug testing, we don't have any updates, but I do know that the full coverage side, you've been looking
Regarding
up the coverage side stuff.
regarding the issue with the node bindings, can we go back to that one? Because
Yeah, okay. Sure.
yeah, there is a last comment that's talking about doing some work with making some documentation on how to make your own wrapper. And last week we discussed this issue a little bit because we felt like maybe we can close this issue because this specifically talks about, adding documentation for non-C language bindings, which we have, I would say we've completed that.
Okay.
And now this other task of writing documentation on how to make your own wrapper, I think is related, but is kind of enough of its own issue that should be tracked separately.
Okay. Sure. So is the proposal to like open a new issue and close this one?
Yeah, I would close this issue and open a new one with that additional task.
Do you want to go ahead and do that?
Yeah, I can do that then.
Okay.
Yeah, we just
So
wanted to run that by you before making any
the
changes.
the main thing would be like Nick was looking at it. So like sounds reasonable, totally reasonable to me. Might be worth shooting Nick an email or something just to say this is the plan.
Okay.
Okay, sounds good. Um, right on the full coverage side, then I know you've been
Yes.
wanted
I've
stuff you want
been
to discuss there.
working on that. Right, if you go to our pull requests, Gabe has that issue second to last, that one there. And if you scroll to the very bottom, I have a linked issue. Yep, that one there. Because I did
Okay.
some investigation. And what we're seeing is that the issue that I was sort of working on was that locally it was showing 90 some percentage, but then on CodeCov it was showing, 60 some.
Right.
And from the investigation, it seems that it's because the CodeCov service also keeps the track of these partial hits, which I documented as, like if there's a branch and not all branches were executed, it would consider that as a partial hit. And the CodeCov percentage does not include partials as a hit. So from those two links, we can see how the coverage is calculated as hits over the sum of all of that. Um, and then comparing that to the coverage reported by gcov, it seems like it counts partials as real hits.
Okay.
Um, So if you were to include the partials in the hit count, that's when we get this like 93 percentage, which is what we're getting reported by gcov. Um,
Okay.
and then I made a little bit of assumptions because the second thing that I saw, for example, in this screenshot for return value, it's saying that there's some branches in there, but you obviously don't see any there. But maybe that's because the value is inlined and it has a macro call to napi throw if failed, which is technically a branch. So maybe that's why it's being expanded into there. But that's pretty much all of the findings there. But I'm not sure where we want to go from this.
Would the partials be related to what you just talked about in terms of like we probably have a lot of if fail, right? But like it's never expected to fail, so we don't actually have tests that can even force those, right? And so I could see
Right.
that might be a source of a lot of those ifs.
Right. Yeah. Like if it's a pending exception or whatever, and then things like
Right.
that. Um, I would definitely say, yeah, that would definitely be it because I can't, yeah, like the value function is not going to fail and throw, so that branch will
Right.
never be taken.
Right.
Um, I'm not sure if maybe we want to consider partials as full hits and just report on that. Um, but from what I saw was that this code cov service, I think there's a different type of coverage collector we could use instead of gcov. I saw this thing called lcov, which it reports differently.
Right.
Um, yeah, like I think it doesn't report branches or something like that, branches or partials or something. And maybe that would provide a different input to the code cov service, which would then maybe give us different results.
Yeah,
But
like I just did, I thought we were using like almost both of them. So it's a GCov is an open source tool that coverage tool that can be used with GCC to generate coverage results. And then LCov is a utility that can manage GCov data generation and generate coverage reports that are organized and readable. So I almost
mm,
thought like LCov might have been the thing that processes GCov.
that might be the case. And then you can upload the LCOV results to
Okay.
code to this code service, and
Right.
then should be able to tell you, line coverage and things like that. Um,
And
or
maybe that ends up being more consistent with what we've done, right? Like I think for the node project, we use GCov and LCov. And I don't
I
know that we
think
saw some big difference when we switched over.
I see. Okay. Because the approach that we're taking with gcov is and this code cov service as well is what's done in the core branch, in the core repo, because that's
Right.
where I got
Okay.
the initial like CI run file for GitHub
Right.
Actions, things like that. So they're very similar. Um, but I guess the core has many more tests, so they're like partial coverage might be actually checking all the branches or something like that. I don't know.
I think the most interesting thing for me would be is like, okay, so if we figured out why it says 65%.
Hmm.
If we consider that says, okay, there's 35%, can we actually add tests to cover that 35%? Like,
I
is
think for
it,
some of them we can,
okay.
but for some of them we can't because it's checking like the return value from the underlying C call, and like if it's generic failure or something like
Right.
that. I mean, maybe we can still make tests like that where, I don't know, you pass a different value than it's being expected. But I think at that point, some of those tests kind of bleed over to what the core Node API tests would be checking for, in my mind.
Right. Although duplication Like, is that a bad thing?
Yeah.
No, right? Like,
Yeah, like if you construct one of our node add-on API Boolean classes, giving it a string value,
right.
applying and then seeing what the return result would be. Maybe that type of testing would be something that we could also do.
Because it, if 65% is accurate and we can add tests to move that up, then I'm like, well, that seems like maybe something we should do, right? Like if it's 65%, but it doesn't really surface things that are actionable, we'd be better with something that surfaces just the actionable things, right? But like, so that's where I'm trying, trying to get to the like maybe we should, if we spend some time looking at that 35%, and if it's like, oh yeah, we could do this, we could do that, then that's good. If it's like, oh no, these are all like, basically everywhere that says is not covered is a false negative or whatever, or something that like we'll never cover,
Right.
then reporting the way we do doesn't really help. Reporting that doesn't really help, right? It just hides the
Right. Like maybe if there was some way that you can put a comment on the code that says, code cov
right.
don't track this line or something like that.
Is there a link in here that has the link to what the results look like?
Um, Debugging has HTML report as an art of debugging command. Yeah, where it says report in the parentheses above the
Right. Okay,
table.
there we go. Okay. Right.
I think that should be one.
So
Yes.
like if we look here, it says 65%. And so like color is not okay, uncovered. So we're looking for red, right?
Mm-hmm. See, like if status is not an API okay on creating
Right.
an external, maybe you could do that by passing in something that's a different type for the env for the environment, pass a null pointer for the environment or something. Like it'd be having to go down these very unhappy paths just by,
Yeah.
but I think that would end up making that partial be considered covered because
Right.
then both of the branches would have been
Yeah.
taken.
Because that kind of seems like that's not a bad test to add, right? Because there could be, we do this delete finalization data, maybe there's something wrong with that, or
Mhm.
so that one like says, hey, yeah, that would be good coverage. So and yellow is the partials.
Right. Yellow is the partials, which they
Okay.
say is if there's a branch and not all branches were taken.
Right. So we have a lot of these nappy throwers failed.
Right.
I suspect then for some of those cases, like because this is a macro, that probably gets expanded and gets counted many, many times.
Yeah. I think that's what I saw in
Right.
local coverage. But then
Hmm.
that when it expands, it never fails. So that's why it's marked as a partial.
Right. And it would be very tough to have a test which,
Well, this would be one where you can construct the number instance,
yeah,
passing to it its own NAPI value pointer. So maybe you pass in a
right.
pointer that's, an object instead of a number, and then that would fail. This call would fail because the underlying NAPI call
Right.
would. So
Yeah.
it's this type of, you'd have to really look and go into the tests and figure out, or the lines and figure out how
Yeah.
we can fix those things. And that's also sort of where I was going back to saying like, oh, well, maybe at that point it's also testing a little bit of the underlying core. But it is true that, we should cover those cases here as well, because
Yeah. Because if somehow we
we're
broke
missing
that
something. Yeah.
and it no
Like if
longer threw an exception, it'd be nice
right.
to know that, right?
Right.
So,
I have a
Well, I
question.
guess for
go
one
ahead.
of the next steps would be, do we want to move this code cov service, like this PR into main?
I would say yes. Like, this seems like okay, 65%. Maybe that's not the number we want to get at and whatever we can think about, but it seems like it's providing useful data.
Mm-hmm.
And so why not, right? I guess is maybe where I'm going. Like this is something where like, hey, we get data, we can see it change. If nothing else, we'll see like, hey, wait a sec, we just chopped it down by 5%. Um,
Right.
and otherwise it's also like, yeah, here it is. And probably a lot of them are like this. So like if people are interested in generating these kinds of tests, we can
Mm-hmm.
decide like, yeah, we
And
can
it
we can
would
say like, we
also,
want to work. Sorry, go ahead.
right. I guess it would also be useful for people that are contributing because then when the code coverage gets ran for their chain, we'd be able to see the coverage for their new lines added.
Absolutely, right? So it's like, hey,
Yeah.
to test. Yeah, I see no downside really.
Okay.
Um, and a little bit of like, hey, we, if it's you've done some good investigation, so like maybe somewhere in our docs we want to say or an issue or something like it's 65%, and these are the kind of issues, and we can say then, and we would like to add tests for these, right? Or we wouldn't, but like my starting point is I'm not quite sure why not if we can, right? Like,
Right. Okay. All right, so I can create a PR, and then it does require a secret to be added to the repository settings to upload
okay.
these. So I can, I guess, contact you on how to do that or over email or something. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
that's secret. So that just help me understand. It's a secret which is
It's a token
generated,
that's, yeah, it's a token that's needed in order to upload the results to CodeCov.
right. So
Mhm.
okay. So that can be recreated if we lost. I'm trying to figure out like, do we need to store that token somewhere other than in the job? Because we can never get it back from the like job, right? The way GitHub works. It sounds like no, if we lost that, we should just generate a new one. So then it
Yeah,
goes back to
the
like, what do you have to do to generate the token, right?
yeah, I think well because the token is shown on the CodeCov service like project settings. And you just copy that value over to the GitHub secrets. And I guess like you can always see the token on the CodeCov service side. It's always there. But I think you can also regenerate it if you need to.
Right. But
Imagine they have
only the people who can log in on behalf of the project, right?
right, yeah. There's some ACLs. That's why I'm doing all of this testing on my Kevin Edie organization and not the
Right.
Node.js one.
Can we have
So
multiple like I know like the regular project uses CodeCov. Can you have multiple things? Like I guess are we going to need a new org or is this going to be just something that goes under the Node.js org?
it would go under the Node.js org.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So in that case, we should already have stored the token, like whatever is needed to log in to CodeCov somewhere that I'm part of the build working group and I'm at the level that has access to all that stuff. So yeah, if you maybe we can get together sometime and I can figure that out, find the thing to be able to log in and generate it when you're ready.
Yeah. Sounds good.
If we can, if that's a problem, because that should be something that anybody in the build like group in the infra level should be able to get at. So
Yeah.
okay.
All right, sounds good. Then that is all the updates for this that I have.
Okay. Well, thanks for moving that forward. It's always good to have the data, right? Because then it's like, yeah,
Mhm.
okay, we haven't covered these kinds of things, and it helps then to drive. I know in Node Core when we added it, you could see people saying, "Oh, well, these lines aren't covered, so here's the PR, these lines," and eventually, like you get to the point where you've got more and more covered. So
Right. Exactly.
okay, So stale issues. I don't think I've seen any comments to say there's anything new there, so probably nothing to discuss. So let's flip over to the issues. No. Okay, pull requests. So Shenzong put together the V8 proposal. That's good. I see this PR. I don't know if he mentioned last time at all, like this was created. I'm wondering if we should hold off landing anything until that goes out to avoid complicating his life.
It should be fine. There's no, do you mean,
Well, it's just
well,
like there's this release proposal, right? So it
oh, I
has
see.
like
Yeah.
a list
Okay.
of the change log, which is like a list of things. So I'm just a little worried if like I go and land
Yeah.
something. Okay, well
Yeah, I
then
would wait.
yeah,
I
okay.
would
So
wait.
let's all not land anything until that goes out and um
Hmm.
okay, otherwise I don't think there's any updates on those. Let's see if there's any new issues. Um
And this first one is new. Opened yesterday. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, entering via API without proper locking in place. I can take a look at this one
Yeah. Okay.
offline. Um,
Okay. Great.
Because looking at it just very cursory, I don't see anything, so I
Yeah.
have to check. Okay.
You take a look. Right.
Yes. So this has been one that popped up. Um,
Yep.
And so this person wants to add some coroutine support for promises to like to await on them or co-return or something. I'm not too familiar with the coroutine standard, but I just pointed out some of our previous things is that our build restrictions are typically based off of nodes build restrictions, which is C++ 17 at this time.
Yep.
Uh, so using 20, would be sort of a change from that. And then Nick had brought up, oh, well, maybe we can have it as an opt-in feature or have it as a external module. Um, and I know in the past we've sort of leaned more towards external modules because we've only really wanted the ours to be like a wrapper for what really exists and
Yep.
not putting too much additional extra functionality. Um, so I just sort of brought that up, but
Yeah,
uh,
well, that's a very good point, right? I think I'm just looking if we've documented that somewhere. No.
different and changes to extending this rationale, larger incorporate these helpers and patterns, extra packages, ecosystem. Um,
Right. So I think this is specifically we basically said what you pointed out, right? Like,
right.
and we've documented that here. So maybe I'll add that into the
Because also I was thinking, if we do add this into our Node add-on API, we'd also have to modify our test system and our
yeah,
build system because we'd also need new targets that have this C++20. So it's, not just as simple as a code review of the feature.
right. Yeah, I mean I think like in terms of this, we've documented this as our approach.
Right.
And for me, like if this can be built as a separate module, I think that's consistent with our approach. And like I don't see why we would change that at this point, right? I don't know
Right.
what people think. I mean, so I would say like
It may be not possible, just it may require like in order to add this functionality for this call wait and call return for Navi promises, it may require some changes to actual classes. It's probably the only kind of one of the reasons why author wants to do it. And technically speaking, this code is not part of node.js, so someone wants to kind of people who compiles this Node API add-on code, they don't not necessarily compile Node.js code, right? The only question how this code can be done in a way that it could work for all developers. Some developers using C++17, some developers using C++20. But
but
you're right,
it
we need to have some kind of tests for that.
but
It's
we've tried to keep the scope in check too. So I think like if it's impossible, then that would potentially change my mind, right? So, but I think it's worth, I think it's worth us saying, like, unless you convince us it's impossible, we believe it's better somewhere else, right? Or,
Right.
and impossible could be like, well, I could do it, but it's like 100 times slower, or
Yeah. And in this specific example, it seems like he creates a new class that extends our NAPI promise. So through extension, he's not modifying any of our existing code. So in this case, it would be very possible to make this as an external module.
And honestly, like we did support for this await functionality for our .NET wrapper in C#, and promise is not where we started with. Effectively, we did it differently. We start with thread safe functions support, so we kind of plugged into that functionality, and then promises was just kind of consequence what actually people were able to use. So this task may be a little bit broader than it's kind of on surface, but yeah, definitely developer already thought about this stuff. I didn't try it in C++, but in C# we did this functionality already.
yeah, I mean, it's, I guess the question is the flip side of we don't want to expand the scope of our APIs too much, right? So that's why we've got this approach of like it's a thin wrapper. There are some exceptions to that, of course. Many of those driven by the fact that like NAN already existed, and we wanted to make sure like you could transition from NAN to Node API. So anything that was in NAN was kind of like, yeah, okay, we'll do that as well.
Right.
So like if we felt that like, well, this functionality is just so useful it needs to be here, that would be maybe another argument that would, override our default is kind of like, hey, if you could do it outside, you can, but we can make exceptions when we think it makes sense, is kind of where I'm going.
Right.
So that's what I was poking, like, Vladimir, do you think this is like a case where that should be an exception?
I don't know, like I just it's first time I see in here. I really like to look into details. I just kind of what I'm saying that we implemented similar functionality for C# in .NET, and thankfully it was a little bigger than just supporting promises. It was the
Gabe
scenario
is
which we
here.
had in mind, like people effectively can, inside of the same method, people can jump from JavaScript thread, they can jump into background thread, do some work with this background thread, jump back to JavaScript thread in the same function. So thankfully it was a scenario which we tried to address. And
Sorry to interrupt, but Gabe is on.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Okay, I pressed the promote button.
Mhm.
So, I guess like are gonna some team members are going to take a deeper look and it's time. Does that seem like a for like kind of setting the expectation that like our default path would be this is likely outside of Node on API since it can be implemented, but it sounds like Vladimir, you'll take a deeper look and maybe you'll come back next time and it's like no, this is so valuable we should include it anyway, right? Like that's a possible outcome.
Yeah, we like it or not, but coroutines are coming to C++20.
Okay.
I may be a little bit skeptical about people can use them correctly because it has so many kind of issues, like because it can capture your call stack variables or your parameters. So technically, and if you don't take care about lifetime management of your variables, you can have all these interesting crashes. Like disaster with them will be much bigger than people start to use lambdas. If you know lambdas, especially doing different
Right.
threads,
Yeah.
they need to capture stuff correctly. So it's yeah.
Yeah, is it that you're using lambdas, another way to use lambdas without really know you are, and then you get all the problems related to them?
Right. So
Okay.
coroutines will, well, in lambdas you can at least explicitly say what your capture is. Like at least you can say like what I'm capturing and see it. But if coroutines you can't even actually see. It's always implicit capture. Just it's okay.
Okay. I see. There's a good amount of back and forth
Yeah,
here.
Chenzong, we discussed this
Yeah.
one last week, and I think Chenzong has been working back and forth with the original poster here.
Perfect. Okay, so nothing really, and I think that's nothing really new since then. Switch over to Node. I guess hello, Gabriel. Sorry, it took me a little while to promote you.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. Yeah.
It was a good discussion about your change about code coverage.
Yeah. This one, so I approved it. Thanks for like basically saying this was the only chain conflict, right? That makes it easier. So
Yeah, it's just struggling with the CI. It keeps failing on unrelated things.
yeah, the CI is definitely it's a miracle if you get it the first time. So it's unfortunate, but the way it is. This one.
Yeah, same
Like,
story.
it's like
I keep rebasing them to maybe something gets fixed in the main branch because there have been issues where the CI fails because I didn't rebase, but in this case, that's not the issue.
Okay.
So I do keep them. I do keep them nice and fresh.
Yeah, but like the thing is, rebasing it runs more tests than resuming. So like
I know, yeah, I know that. Yeah, so there's
you
potential
might
for
be
things to
better off
fail
just
that
resuming a few times because like that at least means you're slowly trickling down to as long as you're
I have resumed. I have resumed, but after a while, like if I resume like two or three times and it fails, then I figure I'd move it up.
No, sometimes the assets go away and you have no choice. So anyway, I was just making sure, which you know already, but because sometimes resuming will never win either. So
yeah, especially the fanned out tests. Those you always have to run all the platforms, even if only one fails.
Yeah, and eventually the assets get deleted. So like after a certain period of time, you can't even resume. So. Looking otherwise, I don't see any like any ones that people want to call out to discuss.
It was discussion between you and another developer about his libnote.
Right.
Yeah, we discussed last time as well. I'm starting to look into stuff. Trying to get put on the rails. I think like a biggest kind of thing I want to do. I just want some of these functions to be removed from one of the files because we also use these files independently. So technically, the whole this embedding stuff should be just in a separate code file. I think it's relatively minor change.
Right, and not under the like at one point I just remember the discussion of it was moved out of Node add-on API or Node API so that like we're not promising it's stable yet, but it's still using the same Node API types and that kind of stuff, right?
Right. So I see like a lot of changes inside of JS native API v8 CC. I think it's one thing we need to just move all these changes out of this file to another one.
Right,
So
yes.
that can be used independently from Node.
Yeah, makes sense.
If you remember, at some point we split up. It was before me joining the team, but we split up the whole with Node API into two groups, right? With JS native API and side of Node API, saying that JS native API can be used externally from node.js.
Right. Yeah, I think Gabriel did most of that work.
Right.
And it's to like, yeah, so you like the Node, you could implement JS native API in other implementations, whereas the Node parts are Node specific and you wouldn't necessarily. So yeah.
And in some sense, like this embedded API, it's Node specific. That's why I believe it should not be part of this file.
Yeah, totally agree.
But otherwise, we actually use it in our also .NET implementation. It's quite
Okay.
fun for tests and stuff. So I think it's a great change. We just need to push it a bit. And
Yep. Okay. So yeah, hopefully and because you were able to push changes to the branch, right? Like, so you have what you have the access you need to kind of push things forward.
I believe for all branches typically have allows to do it. And
Yeah, by default.
at some point, I asked author,
yeah.
and he agreed that it's okay. To
Okay, perfect. Okay, sounds good. Well, thanks for picking that up again. Any others we should chat about? Okay, anything else people have to chat about before we close out?
I've got nothing.
Okay, well, thanks for everybody's time. Great chatting with everybody again this week, and we will see everybody next week and in GitHub between now and then. Thanks.
Alrighty, see ya.
Talk to you
Okay.
later. Bye.
Bye.